I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now. Well, hello, Lisa.
Hi there. How are you, Maya?
I'm okay, but I spy with my little eye something that doesn't look like small government. It's a bill for cameras in classrooms in Iowa, where I actually went to college. It's the field of nightmares. If you film it, they will watch.
Yeah, it's really terrifying, the redefinition of what small government is.
Who's going to pay for it?
All these very large invasive government GOP folks. They want to be in people's bedrooms. They want to be in the classroom.
In the womb and in the room. In the womb and in the classroom. Yep. Make it rhyme.
Yeah, it's all part of this authoritarian push that we keep talking about, that we have a slide happening from democracy to authoritarianism, but those terms are kind of airy. And we want to spend today talking about what that actually looks like at ground level in your communities, in your schools, in the classrooms that your kids are in. So that's going to be our focus today. Okay. What is authoritarianism in your community?
Yeah, and it's visceral, let me tell you. The efforts to normalize violence as speech, the idea of cameras peeking into your kid's classroom, having kids reporting on their teachers, like in teaching history that leaves the uncomfortable part out. Uncomfortable for who? Obviously, we know that.
Yeah, when they're talking about not teaching history that makes people feel uncomfortable, somehow I don't think they're talking about people who look like you, Maya. I think they're talking about people who look like me.
Yeah, we don't want to make you sad.
Right. I might feel badly that America in our history did some atrocious things. And so I should just never learn about them because, of course, that's going to make a more functioning, healthy country for all of us to live in if we just pretend things don't happen instead of learning from them and doing better.
Yeah, welcome to my class, Complementary Race Theory, where I just compliment you. That's all I'm going to do, Lisa. Yes. It'll be a great class. When I think about these bills, I think about intent, right? And the kind of speech that they want to control and the kind of speech that they want to allow. It's all very intentional. It almost feels like they're trying to develop brand loyalty. It's like how they get you on Colgate when you're a little kid, so you use Colgate for the rest of your life, toothpaste. They're doing the same with authoritarianism. It's like they're normalizing it. They want to normalize this in the classroom, and it is incredibly scary.
Yeah, it's super scary. And that whole those concepts that we were raised with, like separation of church and state, freedom of speech, those things are just out the window for the Republican Party at this point. And, they're perfectly happy to have religion in the classroom as long as it's the religion that they have decided is the correct one to bring into the classroom. And it is all very scary.
Yeah, it's all about control, like control. Yes. No, I don't know if we can use that song, Control, but that's...
because they're nasty boys, right?
They are nasty boys. Shout out Janet Jackson, come to our show. We'd love to have you. But the whole thing with book banning, we've seen this before. This time it's different. It's top down, it's well organized, and it's well funded.
Yes. Yeah. It feels very different. And because of all those things that you just listed, it is much more effective. So we need to be much more effective in combating it. And so tonight, our guest, Suzanne Nossel, really excited to have her on. She is a free speech advocate and expert. She's going to be breaking all of this down for us, helping us see what is really going on, and also letting us know what it is that we as individuals and communities can be doing about it.
Solutions.
Yeah.
But before we get to the solutions, we have to look at the problem, which right now is the GOP. Last week in the Republican Party. Let's run it.
The Republican Party declared Friday the January 6th attack was simply ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse.
President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election, but President Trump is wrong.
Pence, you're gonna carry this thing eventually to your grave, okay? And you are a stone cold coward.
I talked to the president a couple times that day, but I don't remember the times.
I've had lunch in the Capitol, for no reason. It's not illegal to go inside the Capitol.
Did you break through the window to get into lunch?
The sons and daughters of America are not foot soldiers for your party's inept geriatric despot.
Trump's become like a father to me. I get to talk to him just about every single day. He's incredible. He's such a genius.
The fact that he's willing to make a promise at the outset that it must be a black woman, I gotta say that's offensive.
President Trump, without question, he's the blackest president that we have ever had in this nation.
You've heard about the infamous chainsaw bayonet. It is real, and we're going to put it to use.
I've told Nancy Pelosi to kiss my mask a long time ago.
We know the masks don't work and the vaccines don't work.
Can we get you to run for president in the next few years? Or maybe a green DeSantis ticket?
We need to just abolish the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in the first place.
If AOC was fat and in her 60s, would anyone listen to another thing she ever said?
I'm Mike Murphy, and I'm running for governor.
Well, they have just dialed up the crazy, haven't they?
Yeah, because, if a woman isn't young and attractive, why the hell would you care about anything that she has to say?
Imagine platforming such a ridiculous person with such a ridiculous statement. I am also a bit concerned about Bannon and Pence when he says he's going to take it to his grave. I'm like, Bannon should probably know that because it looks like he's already in his grave.
Or has been, and yeah.
Yeah, it's emerging. It's like Tales from the Crypt. It feels very much that way. He knows there. But this is...
I'm sorry. I'm struck every week watching this Last Week in the Republican Party segment. Just the amount of violence and promotion of violence and glorification of guns and violence. We're going to talk about this tonight, that mixing speech and violence and calling what happened on January 6th legitimate political speech, right? Oh yeah, we just, we went in the Capitol and we had lunch and then we assaulted some police officers. We wanted
as you do,
vice president. And we took a dump on the floor.
Yeah. Legitimate political discourse, sure. Lisa, come on. It's legitimate political discourse. You know how we're always chatting like that. That's a thing we do. It's so infuriating, really, to watch that, to see these people who are supposed to be, examples of leadership. And that's what we always have to remember. Our kids are watching. The kids are watching. And so if this is what we're going to allow to be a representation of who we are as a country, what can we expect for our future? So
yeah, well, we're going from the kids are watching to we're watching the kids.
Nice segue.
Cameras in the classrooms. And just one of the things we want to talk with our guests about. So the depth and breadth of her background, from being CEO of Amnesty International to her role now as CEO of PEN America. Our guest tonight is absolutely no stranger to tackling really complicated issues that America's facing right now. Please welcome Suzanne Nossel.
Hi.
Suzanne, thank you.
We're so glad to have you here. So a lot has changed about political discourse in the last few years. And this is an incredibly complex issue. So free speech, its boundaries, they should be debated in open democratic societies, but it's not that simple. To just say anything, anywhere that you want. And in your book, you provide guardrails for journalists, social media, daily life. Can you tell us a little bit about the 20 principles? Not all 20 principles, but highlight a few of the important ones from your book?
Yeah, sure. Look, what I try to do in Dare to Speak, Defending Free Speech for All, is lay out a blueprint for how we can drive forward the goal of a more equal, inclusive, representative society without compromising robust protections for free speech. And I fundamentally believe in both of those things. I believe we're a pluralistic society. We have to make space for everybody to have a voice. We have to reflect the fact that we are diverse along so many different dimensions: political, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, but that shouldn't mean suppressing free speech. It does mean a whole series of approaches to free speech that I think are really crucial to make that possible. I begin talking about the importance of conscientiousness with language. Just because we have free speech, I don't think you should be punished for saying something that's offensive. That doesn't mean there's a license to use racial slurs or to be ignorant about how different groups of people like to be described. I talk about, when I had to tell my mother years ago that the term Oriental was no longer acceptable. It was considered offensive. And she said, why Oriental? I've used this all my life. There's nothing wrong with it. There are still Oriental restaurants to be found. But she had to recognize, look, the mores have changed, and people want to be known as Asian Americans, and you ought to defer to that. And so that's where I begin. And I talk about a whole series of other principles about how to talk about difficult ideas, the importance of taking into account intent and context in evaluating how to respond to speech. And so the principles for speakers, for listeners, and then for all of us as we debate free speech questions and free speech policies.
Right. It is possible to have discussions and passionately share your views without the actual intention of offending a group of people or the person you're talking to. Social media, I think, has deteriorated that to some degree. Speaking of the internet, the book bans that are popping up across the country in this coordinated effort, it's a little different this time around because of the internet. So what do you think the true impact is? Because this doesn't really feel as though the end goal really is to ban the books or ban the information because the kids are going to get it anyway. It seems more performative than that.
Yeah, I think it's really comes down to a battle for control. You touched on this in the introduction. There is a large flank within our society that sees the direction things are moving, that we are becoming an increasingly pluralistic population, increasingly progressive population. We're embracing new kinds of rights, the rights of LGBTQ individuals, a more determined approach to racial justice, and they want to push back. They feel like that's a net loss for them, that it's a zero-sum game, that they are going to be shut out of this new society, excluded, not heard from. And so, that manifests itself in the effort to roll back voting rights, in things like the Capitol insurrection, which was talked about in the video, and in bans on books and on curriculum. It's an effort to reassert control over schools that people feel is slipping from their fingers. And it means excluding narratives that contradict the kind of version of America that they want to instill in the minds of kids who are being educated.
Yeah, and to me, what's super interesting is that you can ban information or attempt to ban information all you want, but as you pointed out, our society is growing more pluralistic, and that you can't stop. You can't ban the existence of people. LGBTQ people are here to stay. Diverse populations are here to stay. And yet it seems like the GOP is making an attempt to make our classrooms, public education, public enemy number one. And almost as if that's the source of it. Like if they get it right there, they'll be able to cut it off before it gets elsewhere. And that's just not realistic. Obviously, are there any principles in your book that you feel that we can kind of latch on to right now that we're kind of sliding off into this very, very dangerous territory?
There are, and I think you're absolutely right. This bill that passed in the Florida Senate today, the Don't Say Gay bill, that imposes all kinds of prohibitions and punishments for discussions of LGBTQ themes in schools, is really pretty terrifying. It's viewpoint based. It's an effort to kind of expunge a whole identity and shunt it into the classroom closet, and it's so backward looking. I think we need to find ways to discuss what people consider to be difficult ideas. And there are a lot of great books about LGBTQ families and identities that are tailored toward young kids, that don't sort of bring up sexuality in ways that are age inappropriate. And so it's going the extra mile to figure out how to talk about these tough topics. And I explain that in the book. Also, if you want to protest, if you object to something, I talk about the importance of protesting speech without silencing it. Don't shout people down. Don't try to punish them for what they've said. Bring up your points, make a counter argument, insist that something else be put on the curriculum to offer a different perspective. If you don't believe that what's being dubbed critical race theory, which of course really isn't critical race theory, but it's certain ideas about racial injustice, about the role of slavery in American history. If you reject that, insist that other lenses be brought to bear. I think it's fair to say there shouldn't be any one lens on American history that's imposed on high school students. The whole enterprise of studying history is to reflect on how time periods are experienced differently by different people, how the analysis of historical eras evolves over time, and that's what we should be introducing kids to.
Yeah, that we're at a place, or some portion of the population is at a place now that we no longer think that one of the really important things that kids learn in school is how to think and how to learn. And the only thing that is safe now, these folks seem to believe, is to only teach one thing. So kids don't have to think, and they don't have to compare different ideas. It's really sad, but it is happening all over the country. And apparently we're going to monitor now whether or not the teachers are abiding by the educational gag rules that they would like to put on. We have, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, who created a tip line. It didn't quite work out the way he had anticipated, but that was for students to report on their teachers. Charlie Kirk's got a watch list.
Oh yeah, the watch list.
Horrifying. I mean, pretty much everything Charlie Kirk does is horrifying, but this isn't unique to the United States. Can you talk about other places where these sort of movements have taken hold?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that's most alarming to us in America is the comparison with what we see around the world in authoritarian settings. Vladimir Putin is someone who is very much determined to control the narrative. And, he does it by putting writers in jail, by shutting down organizations that are talking about, some of Russia's dark history, or that, want to revisit periods like this Stalinist era. That is suppressed through brute force in Russia. And we work on behalf of writers and journalists who are jailed because they dare to defy his edicts. In Iran, they don't allow the use of foreign educational materials in schools. Same thing now in China, in sort of the younger grades. You're not allowed to bring in any international curricular materials. And, there is this battle for the hearts and minds of rising generations, as you touched on. It goes on everywhere. But, here in this country, our approach to this traditionally is, the answer is more speech, more perspectives, more books, more debate and dialogue, that we would not resort to these repressive tactics, taking things off the table, taking books off the shelf, prohibiting teachers and librarians from making available certain ideas. So to see a resort to that is really alarming. I will say, and I think it's worth noting, what people on the right would say in defense of these measures is that they are a counterattack against the imposition of a kind of dogma from the left, that on the left, the drive to better recognize different kinds of identities, to elevate the importance of slavery as a driving force in American history, has in some instances gone too far. And I think that's a legitimate subject that we should be able to debate. Is the 1619 project, should that be the basis for high school American history curriculum? Historians can disagree on that subject, but the answer cannot be to ban it. And if you're going to create, we're a free expression organization, so we recognize that not all threats to free speech are created equal. And I think, if there is a attitude that is too vociferous about a particular perspective, or a school that is propounding one set of views to the exclusion of all others, that's problematic. But the answer can't be a legislated a viewpoint-based prohibition on speech. If there's a hierarchy of violations of freedom of expression, that legislative ban is at the top of it.
So, and I want to talk about that because I spend a lot of time on college campuses. I perform comedy at colleges, and you mentioned that in your book, and this idea that comedians have stopped performing on college campuses. And I hear this a lot from some comedians saying that their viewpoint's not welcomed. Meanwhile, I get booked quite a bit because I talk about the intersection of race, gender, class, and these are things that are very pressing issues that students want to hear about. And I perform at conservative schools, at liberal schools, like across the board. And so what's really interesting to me, and I guess I really would love your take on this, because now it seems like the intent, which you mentioned earlier, is to really try to exclude from the right, to exclude a portion of the population from the discussion, right? And so it's not equivalent in the sense that it's like, because they're saying, okay, we're not going to have these discussions about America because America's good, America's great, and we don't want anybody to think anything otherwise. And so it feels very exclusionary, not just as an equivalent. And so I'm just curious about, now that things are kind of flying off into this what feels like very, very dangerous, authoritarian territory, if that changes a bit how we approach this.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's helpful to try to draw an equivalency between sort of the censoriousness on the left and the repression of free speech that we see on the right. And as I said, particularly because it's taking on these legalistic forms and invoking the power of government to impose bans and prohibitions, I think the threats to free speech right now from the right are more serious. That doesn't mean that the encroachments on freedom of speech from the left are insignificant. I've heard a lot from students on campuses who are more conservative, and sort of feel like there's no space for them, that the college Republicans can't get a faculty advisor, and without a faculty advisor, you can't book a room for a lecture, or they want to have someone come to speak on campus, and it gets canceled or shouted down because the views are considered controversial or offensive. And I think while some might not see that as problematic, I do think it has fueled this kind of really intense and even more damaging backlash, and that there is more work to be done to try to reestablish the moorings of free speech on both the right and the left. We began a campus speech program in 2015, and it was mostly focused on threats, honestly, from the left, and sort of this sense that in the very important and worthwhile, necessary drive to make the campus more equal and inclusive, there wasn't sufficient awareness of principles of free speech and academic freedom, and the importance of reconciling those with the effort to drive forward a more evolved campus.
Yeah, that's really important. We want diverse views, and those opposing opinions to be able to debate these subjects. That's good and healthy. That's what you're supposed to do in a democracy. Another thing you're supposed to have that is thriving in a democracy is journalism. And I think from left to far right, we have incredible problems with what is happening in journalism and what people perceive to be journalism. But one of the things that you talked about, the sort of both sides being careful not to equate two things that really have different weights. From a journalistic perspective, when a journalist is interviewing someone and there is a huge amount of misinformation coming out, or there has been a view on one side given, and so time is given to another side, but the other side is not actually speaking in the world of reality. What's the journalist's responsibility for, in the moment fact checking or giving equal time to a perspective on reality and a perspective on fiction?
Yeah, look, I think it's extremely important to sustain our rooting and our foundation in facts and truth, not to subscribe to the notion that there are no facts, there is no truth, which some people would like to have you believe. When a journalist confronts a dissembler or an official who's purveying a falsehood, they have to contextualize it. Some people talk about the truth sandwich. So you talk about the truth first, then you report on the falsehood. If it's noteworthy, if it's a public official who's saying something that's just dead wrong in terms of advice on how to handle the pandemic, it may be important for voters to know that that's the position that their mayor or governor is taking. So it may be something that's legitimate news, but then to bookend it, but on both sides with the facts, and to keep a clear sense of where those authoritative facts can come from. And I talk on the disinformation front about sort of three groups of information consumers. Those of us who are anchored, who know where to find trusted information. We know that the New York Times and the Washington Post carry out credible journalism. We know that the CDC and the World Health Organization, by and large, can be trusted in terms of what they say as far as the pandemic. Then there are the adrift, those who don't know where to turn. They're seeing a stream of news sources on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They all kind of look the same. The earmarks of a credible news brand that I may have grown up with don't mean much to them. That doesn't register the way that it does for me. And so they're in a constant position of trying to sort through the information that they're getting and figure out what to credit. Then the third group are the maroon, those who feel they're grounded, they know where to turn, they have trusted news sources, but those news sources are false. They're propagandists, it may be foreign governments, it may be conspiracists, it may be quackery, it may be the people behind the January 6th insurrection, but those are the only sources that they turn to. They're very hard to read.
I think what you meant to say is legitimate political discourse on January 6th is actually not an insurrection. We've been talking about that a lot this week because we did have a guest on once who talked about the truth being what everybody was. Aja Radin, she wrote The Truth About Lies. The truth being what people agree on, right? And so this idea of what the dominant culture is going to agree upon is going to then be our truth. And so it seems like we are in a battle for truth over what facts are. And so what recommendations do you have for not just us, for our listeners, for our audience, to have these kind of conversations with their friends, family, and loved ones who are marooned, who are way just off the beaten path?
I mean, that is really difficult. Talking to friends and family about disinformation, we hear a lot from people who have relatives or colleagues who, have kind of, from their perspective, gone off the deep end and come to subscribe to ideologies that seem just completely fanciful and spurious and sometimes dangerous. And it's difficult to confront. There aren't really easy answers. There are some methods that have been used in de-radicalization of people who become extremists that can work. People who have moved away from these conspiracy groups and ideologies can sometimes be effective interlocutors to approach those who are still under the thrall. it's very important to sort of have your own facts straight, because one thing that can just reinforce someone's false beliefs is that they can poke holes in what you've said. And that's one of the reasons it's been so important for the mainstream media and credible journalists to fact check, to think before they publish. I mean, just watching the coverage of the Sarah Palin lawsuit against the New York Times, her libel lawsuit, kind of the haste with which things get published. I mean, I think there's no question there was no recklessness or actual malice, but things are moving incredibly quickly, and I think sometimes too quickly. And when mistakes are made, it can be extremely costly to the credibility of an outlet or to a government official. And right now, that credibility, holding on to that for the institutions that kind of anchor us, I think is extraordinarily important.
So
Well
we like
said.
to leave our viewers with action items, something that they can do in their communities, in their their families, whatever it is they feel prepared to do, with what is happening with book banning initiatives and the monitoring of teachers and cameras in the classroom. There seems to be such a huge infrastructure behind that is pushing these things. What can individuals be doing on a local level right now to try to inoculate their communities if it's not happening yet, or take some action if it is?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I think ultimately these battles will be won and lost at the local level. It's being sort of presented as an issue of local control, although, as we've discussed, the forces behind it go beyond that. But people who are willing to get engaged, we have resources on our website for community members, for teachers, for librarians, for authors whose books are challenged, for students who want to push back. And there's a lot you can do. You can go in front of your school board and testify. You can go and read one of these books and offer an informed perspective. So many of these bans are books that people have not even taken the time to read. So they complain about, one line or one profanity, and there's no articulation of the value of the story. And when a community member comes forward and says, hey, listen, I've read this book, here's what it's about, here's why it's important, that can actually be very powerful. We've seen students mobilize and defeat some of these bans. And, the school board meetings generally are open to the public. It's a place where you can register your voice. And we, on our website, penn.org, we give you the tools to do that.
That's excellent advice. And so thank you so much, because this really helps contextualize a lot of what's happening. There is so much noise, and I love that you acknowledge how complex this issue is, that if we can't shut speech down. We absolutely cannot, because that then just leads us into a very negative direction. So incredibly grateful for the work that you are doing, and we will most certainly, everybody, go to the website, get those resources. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I love resources. I'm all about resources. I'm scared of school board meetings. I don't know if I want to go, but every time I see them on the news, I'm sure they're just showing the crazy ones. There's probably very normal school board meetings.
Yeah, I have gone to a lot of school board meetings over the year, and generally there's nobody there except the school board members, and they're tedious. Most school board meetings are not what we're seeing on TV right now, but the decisions that are being made are important. And these are just local folks from your community who they're not getting paid some huge amount. They're doing it because they care about education. But when they're getting bombarded by only one side, they're human beings. And so we have to make sure that we are also making sure that the other perspective is being heard, and that people on school board members don't end up feeling as though all the weight in the community, the view of the community, is legitimately represented by people who want cameras in the classroom and to burn books. That's they're not the majority.
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah, cannot let the crazy control the conversation. Absolutely not on our watch. So pick up a banned book today. Feel free to.
They're really good. They're generally really good.
That's why they're banned.
Most of them you've probably read.
Yes, exactly. So do that. Start a book club, even have those discussions, discuss those books with your children. I think Suzanne's point about understanding the context of the books as well, very important, because then you can get your facts right. And be able to discuss things. And so it's important. Fact check yourself so that somebody else can't fact check you. I think it's like fact check yourself before you wreck yourself. Is that how it goes?
No? I think that's it. I think that's exactly how it goes. Yeah. Don't cherry pick. I mean, you can look at any book and you can cherry pick 6 words out of it, and someone will find that offensive. But generally the context, not so much.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of offensive, before we go, God, you're so talented, Maya. We want to make sure that everybody sees this video that Maya made with the help of one of our brilliant editors.
She did a great job.
Maya, she did a phenomenal job. Kate, shout out. Did you know that Maya can do red hot takedowns? We have a really good one to share with you. This is Maya's TED Talk.
Ted, we gotta talk. You might have been great at debating, but you are terrible at adapting. And that's why you'll never be president. And so you turn your anger on the people who do know how to adapt. People like me, Black women. So when you say it's offensive, Biden made a promise his SCOTUS pick would be a black woman and then said we're only 6% of the country, what I hear you saying is, why won't America pick me? But if you had half the resilience, patience, and love of country it takes for a black woman to thrive in America, where until 1868 we were just a fraction of a human being, you'd know Biden's not offensive. You are. And more offensive than your words, your fear. It's sickening. I mean, I get it. I get why you want to leave, not just how you flew to Cancun when things got chilly, but how you want to leave behind the ideals of our nation because you're afraid it no longer values you. Senator, your role, whether you choose to accept it or not, is to represent the totality of your state, and that includes black women. We're here to stay. But don't worry, we aren't here to replace you. We're here to grow, to evolve, to hear the voices of all Americans, even yours, because representation is how we live up to our promise. Just because you can't evolve doesn't mean America can't.
So good.
I want to replace him maybe with Meg Thee Stallion, though. Like, if that were an option, we get Meg Thee Stallion instead of Ted Cruz. Like, I'd take it.
Well, apparently, Ted Cruz has a background in constitutional law, but we see how useful that's been for Ted. So I don't know. Maybe might be a complete reasonable replacement.
Yeah, she just graduated. I don't know what she studied, but I don't know. I like her. She's a reasonable human being, and he is not. So yeah. That's been our show. Thanks for watching, everyone. You know where to find us, at Maya on Stage on Twitter and on Instagram. Lisa also at LC Senecal. In both places, find us there. Share the show. We love to hear your feedback. We want to know what banned books you're reading. So definitely tweet us with that. Hashtag Ask for Speaking. Let us know what you're thinking about, because it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and then, please do. And the other thing you should do is check out, as always, Thursday night, 7 p.m., The Breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. Tomorrow, they're going to be on with Matthew Seligman. Going to be, as always, a really great show. So make sure you don't miss it. And we will see all of you next Wednesday.